All right, hello and welcome, and thank you guys for working with us on a early start today, and compared to our normal 10 o'clock. But um, we just want to share news on what we've found at Miraflores Park and what we know now, and to announce the start of the city's Miraflores Park Burial Ground Study. In June of 2021, human remains were discovered by a local Boy Scout troop in the crawl space underneath the Boy Scout building at the park. Local authorities were contacted, including the Pensacola Police Department, the District 1 Medical Examiner's Office, the biological anthropologist from the University of West Florida, as well as the Florida State Historic Preservation Office and the state archaeologist. The field investigation indicated that the human remains were associated with historic fill and originated from a historic disturbed grave context. They were likely disturbed during the construction of the Boy Scout building in 1934. The investigation determined that the remains are older than 75 years, meaning they are not from a modern forensic case. Biological anthropologists from the University of West Florida conducted a skeletal analysis that indicated there were two individuals present, one female and likely one male. Ancestry is difficult to determine with partial skeletal remains, but features of the female individual suggested that there are traits that align with the various known populations in historic Pensacola, such as African, Creole, and European. Ongoing historic research has identified multiple historic documents, including newspaper articles, meeting minutes, legal records, and a map indicating that Havana Square was used as a burial ground primarily for people of African American or Creole descent. And for clarification, Havana Square was the name of this park previous to Miraflores. Since the discovery, it was also determined that the City of Pensacola has jurisdiction over engaging a study of the park and would lead where we go from here. I want to thank our Cultural Resources Coordinator, Adrienne Walker, who's been at the forefront of this, and you'll hear from her in a second on some more of the technical parts of this, and of course, Assisting Planning and Zoning Manager Greg Harding. They have been on top of this and have the city in a position to move forward here. So I'm very grateful for their hard work. They brought me this research last month and really said how would we like to proceed, and I've kind of half jokingly told them, there isn't a decision to be made. This is pretty clear. We're a city that prides itself on its history. And in opportunities like this, we get a chance to learn from our past. This will be, a fascinating topic for some, as you can imagine, but these were people. They were part of a community. These people could be ancestors of current Pensacolians. There are stories to be told here, and I believe that the future of this park, how this study proceeds and how its story unfolds should be handled delicately and respectfully. With that, I'll be creating a community advisory group to assist in the assessment and future commemoration of Miraflores Park. My office and city staff will be working with the community advisory group, partners, and community stakeholders as the study and research continue. We will announce that group on Tuesday, January 17th. Adrienne will speak to some of the background again and specifics of the studies and research conducted to date, and we'll be able to answer some of those technical questions you may have about the park and where we go from here. Before I hand it off to her, I again want to thank all of the agencies and departments. This was not solely a City of Pensacola undertaking. This is a lot of different people invested in wanting to learn more about the history of our city. I mentioned some: Pensacola Police Department, District 1 Medical Examiner's Office, the UWF Anthropology Department, the Florida Division of Historical Resources, the state archaeologists, the UWF Archaeology Institute, and the Florida Public Archaeology Network. I'll call up Adrienne Walker to give you a little more context, and then I'll be back for some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Reeves. Research is ongoing as we move forward with addressing the burial ground at Miraflores Park. The skeletal analysis consisted of over 100 commingled or mixed up skeletal fragments. This type of analysis is lengthy, and it requires utmost care, attention to detail, and respect as we look at each skeletal fragment individually, and that was done by Dr. Katie Miller-Wolf, who's a bioarchaeologist at the University of West Florida. The analysis provided information regarding biological profiles. The female individual was estimated to be of 35 to 44 years of age, and the second individual, who is likely male, was estimated to be 40 to 47 years of age. During the historic period, Pensacola was extremely diverse and was composed of a multicultural community that is not always easily defined. The historic record has provided a wealth of documents that indicate this burial ground was utilized by individuals of African or potentially Creole descent. In Pensacola, Creole typically refers to an individual of African descent and European descent, that being usually Spanish or French. During the skeletal analysis, it was also determined that no indigenous features were present among the human remains. As we move forward, an obvious question is, would the city want to excavate to identify any additional burials? And the answer is no, but we are exploring options for a ground penetrating radar or GPR survey, which is a non-invasive technique that allows us to see what is below the ground. It's been fairly successful for locating unmarked burials, though GPR does have the potential to be inconclusive when there is a large amount of ground disturbance, such as utility construction or development, or even root systems from large trees. Fortunately, Miraflores Park is relatively undeveloped, other than the Boy Scout building and modern park amenities, so we are hopeful that the GPR survey will provide favorable results. It is important that we do not disturb the ground any further at Miraflores Park, and that we respect the final resting place of these historic community members. In terms of the timeline, you have a printout that highlights the events that led us to this moment. Following the state archaeologist's authorization of the skeletal analysis, the City of Pensacola received the full report of the analysis in April of 2022. I began at the city as the Cultural Resources Coordinator in October of 2022, and I was tasked with continuing the research and taking the lead on Miraflores Park. The city received confirmation later that month that the potential unmarked burial ground at Miraflores falls under City of Pensacola jurisdiction. We look forward to collaborating with the Community Advisory Group as well as the community at large during this meaningful and impactful study. We will keep everyone updated as we make progress and move closer to conducting the GPR survey, which will be public-facing with opportunities for public involvement. I appreciate the contributions of the agencies and departments mentioned by Mayor Reeves, in addition to city staff that have been very supportive and have assisted in our efforts to properly acknowledge and protect this cultural resource. This time, we can bring Mayor Reeves back up and we can take any questions that you guys may have.
Yeah. Feel free to fire away. Jim.
So, how exactly were the remains discovered and under what context?
The human remains were found by a local Boy Scout troop who often use Miraflores Park. It does the Boy Scout building at Miraflores Park. It serves as a community center for a lot of different groups. They were there doing a cleanup and were in the basement. This building actually has a basement that includes a crawl space area, and in the crawl space they found what they realized were bones, and then they called PPD, and then it kind of unfolds from there.
Like buried, partially buried, completely uncovered,
I think they were disturbed, like Mayor Reeves said. What we think is that these were human remains that were in a grave context and were at some point disturbed. We think probably in 1934 when the Boy Scout building was built. So they were already disturbed. This isn't a situation where the Boy Scouts did any of the digging or disruption. They merely found them already disturbed and started removing them as the cleanup and realized what they were.
Do you have a year from when these remains likely date from?
We do not. These were very partial skeletal remains. There's not a whole lot you can do with that. So we don't really have an exact date of when they were buried. Like I said, we were able to tell from the skeletal analysis how old these individuals were, but we can't pinpoint when they were buried. But from the historic record, we do have a lot of documents indicating that we at least know this burial ground was used from 1884 to 1887. We have a map that marks Miraflores Park, known as Havana Square then, as a graveyard. And then in 1887, we have it being discussed in actual city meetings with City Council and Board of Public Works. So we're still keeping the research going, trying to find out as much as we can and try to maybe nail down how long it was used and when.
And just to add some context here, and to emphasize what Adrian had said earlier, one of the unique circumstances of this, compared to what's happening around the state or around the country, is that this is happening, that this map shows that it's in a public, undeveloped space. There's a lot of scenarios where perhaps something is discovered that existed, but it's, under a commercial space or it's in a neighborhood. That's what makes this a little more unique of a situation, is that to put it frankly, it's something that we can do about learning more about it, where in some instances, that is not always the case. You may know it's there, but may not be able to do as much about it. But considering it's a city park, and a developed city park, it's something that we can do.
Yes, there's a whole preservation aspect to this that we have that a lot of other municipalities don't have. Areas in Clearwater and Tampa, other areas in the southeast have found African American unmarked burial grounds because a parking lot was put on them in the 50s or 60s, or buildings are built, and now those are being raised or altered, and that's when they're finding out that people are still there. So in our case, we're very lucky that at least from 1884, Miraflores, that's the first mention of it, it hasn't been really developed. So we're very fortunate that we have a big preservation aspect here to protect this resource.
When will GPR begin out there at the park?
We are still exploring our options for that. We have some great local entities like the UWF Archaeology Institute and the Florida Public Archaeology Network, who have the technology and the software and the training to do such a survey, but we are exploring our options for how to do that. GPR is very weather dependent too, so we have to consider the time of year. There's a lot of factors that go into planning something like that, but we are actively exploring it.
Could there be more areas around the city of Pensacola that we could eventually find more graves?
There's always potential for that. Pensacola's been occupied for a very long time, and we have a wealth of historic records in this area, so I'm sure this is not the first or last instance of this occurring. And that's where this can really show the historic record and archaeology really working together to try and identify some of these areas.
What happens if you find out there are other graves on the property?
If we are able to determine that there's other burials, preservation and protection would be of utmost importance. We would want to make sure we are kind of marking or delineating that area, that we're also interpreting it and commemorating it and doing everything we can to make sure our citizens and even our visitors understand the importance of this resource.
And Tony, I'll add to that, part of that Citizens Advisory Group, as Adrian mentioned, this is not being approached as an excavation project. This is being approached at how do we want to honor, commemorate this space long term. And so.
The complexion if it goes from a park to a former cemetery. I mean, there's a.
Well, what I'd say.
Does the use change? Does it?
It's too early to say. We've got to see, and evaluate what we've got and what we're dealing with before we would say, I would say, there's a lot of decisions to be made as we continue to gather more facts, but we can't say that right now until really that first step takes place, and so we'll get that going, as soon as we can.
When did, was this you say burial ground, was it a recognized cemetery? And when did it shift from Havana Square to Miraflores Park? And I know this is a multi-part. Was the
We'll try to remember them all.
of that lot, probably used as a burial ground, or was it just kind of right there in that area?
So that part of town around Miraflores Park has a very interesting and lengthy history with ownership. That area was platted out fairly early in the 1830s, and lots were sold off. And as time goes, things change, things shift. But there was a lot of property ownership in that area, and thankfully, Jennifer Melcher with the UWF Archaeology Institute has been researching that and trying to understand the property ownership in the area to help maybe try to determine who was living around there at the time. So it has been platted out for quite some time. The first time we see Havana Square mentioned, which is the original name, is in 1884. It could have been called that prior, we just haven't found any record of that yet. The name was changed in 1965 as a part of the People to People program under President Eisenhower, and it was to recognize our sister city, Miraflores, Peru. And a delegation came and they dedicated the bust of Ricardo Palma that is in the park today. And many people I think don't realize that. It's at the corner of the park. There is a large statue with a bust of a Peruvian author, and that was given to the city during that program. Did I get your questions?
I think so.
Oh, okay.
I guess to follow up on that, is there anything that you found in your research or the record indicate kind of how the use of a graveyard was kind of forgotten and it became a park and that kind of?
This is incredibly common in the historic period, and like I said, referencing places like Clearwater and Tampa, more and more unmarked burial grounds are being found of African American or even Creole descent, people of color, and this kind of goes back to how history has played out, and those people were marginalized in the historic period, and then eventually somebody comes through and wants to build a building or they want to clean up a park, and so they do, and then it gets lost with time. And that's where even social memory can play a big part through this community advisory group and through some public participation. There may be some citizens who can come out and say, I remember when my grandmother or great-grandmother mentioned that park, or, so we might be able to gain a lot from the community if there's any social memory of that space that didn't get written down because it was about a marginalized community.
Before we end, we will have, to be able to gather some feedback and share this with the community, we'll have a website that'll have some of this information as we move forward, and updates, information on the advisory group and when those meetings will take place. Those will be taking place in the sunshine. That will be at cityofpensacola.com/Miraflores, Miraflores. Thank you guys again, and we'll get started with our regular press conference here shortly.
Yeah, so that concludes this press conference. We're going to take about a 5 to 10 minute break, and then the mayor will be back for his regular 10 a.m. weekly press conference. If any of the media members would like to speak to Adrian or the mayor separately, they have a few minutes in between, but we'll be getting started in about 5-10 minutes with the mayor's regular press conference. Thank you.